just record on this computer. All right, here we go. Well, welcome everyone to the 2021-2022 school year. Thank you for joining us at Senior Parent Night / post-secondary planning. I know we can't see you, but we see the names coming in, and we're so glad that you could join us here virtually for our first event for parents. Actually, you've come to events before, but it's our first event for this school year for students and families in the class of 2022. So I am Jessica Smedley. I'm the Director of School Counseling for Hillsborough Township Public Schools. And here with me tonight giving our presentation is Mrs. Amy Thompson. Many of you know Mrs. Thompson and have worked with her, have furiously emailed with her, et cetera, through the spring and summer months. And now we are into college applications and well into the post-secondary planning season. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mrs. Thompson.
Great, thanks so much, Ms. Smedley. And we do also have some of our, or actually probably almost all of our school counselors are also on with us this evening, and they'll be following up with Q&A in those individual Google Meets after our session. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I apologize in advance. I'm a little not as good in Zoom as I am in Google Meets. So I think I'm okay though. If there's issues, please put them in Q&A if you can't see what's going on. But what we should be talking about this evening is the college application process. So just to let you know what to expect, this portion of the presentation should be 45 minutes or hopefully less. The beginning may be some review for many of you, should be review for many of you, but what I find from our years of doing this even in person is that we tend to have people at all different points at the beginning of the senior year. So I got a little bit of review before I go into the new stuff. Before I go any further, if you didn't already catch it, go ahead and add this to your personal calendars. Financial aid night is going to be Tuesday, September 28th at 6:30. Yes, I know it's the same week as back to school night for the high school. I'm sorry, there's just limited dates in September between the holidays and all the schools back to school nights. So that's kind of the best I can do. So the 28th, 6:30 p.m. It's going to be on Zoom. And we'll be with Kristen Isaacson from Monmouth, and she's terrific. She walks through everything with the FAFSA, and you will be all ready to get going on October 1st if you wanted to start your FAFSA as soon as it opens up. Her session is super helpful. So let's get started. Let's just review a little bit about the two kinds of colleges. We've got 2-year schools and 4-year schools. The bulk of this presentation this evening is really concentrating on the 4-year school process, because the 2-year school process is much simpler. So just kind of overview for those of you thinking about applying to RVCC. Typically, we're looking for students to apply in kind of the late winter, early spring months, kind of February, March timeframe. If you're just applying to RVCC as a regular student, there's not a whole lot you need to do. You fill out an application, you get an acceptance. You don't have to provide a transcript until the end of the application process. They don't require SAT or ACT scores, so you can use them to potentially avoid taking placement tests in English or math. No letters of recommendation. The only exception is if you're applying to RVCC's Honors College. In that case, then a transcript is required, letters of recommendation, et cetera, and that process more mirrors the 4-year college process. So if you know you're only applying to 2-year schools, it's going to be easy. You're not going to hear from us a whole lot until we get into that, February, March timeframe. What we typically do is an in-person session with the RVCC admission staff. They come in, they work with you and get your application done in-house. So you can do it right on site with us at the high school. 4-year schools, that, as I said, you're the bulk of this presentation. So your goal is you're applying by the deadlines. Those are going to range. The earliest deadlines we've got out there that are real deadlines are October 15th for only a couple of schools. And then you'll see the deadlines range. While you may see some late deadlines, especially some schools that have rolling admissions, they might list some deadline that's like March or May or July. Please don't wait until March or May or July to apply to those schools. We want to still try to get the bulk of that stuff out really before that winter break is kind of our guideline, to try to get the bulk of things out, at least the first application for students out by that winter break. Most of our students, actually a good portion of our students, have all of their stuff done by winter break. So that's kind of what you're aiming for. September, October, November, December, we're super busy working on just college stuff. and getting all that stuff out the door. And for those things, we're going to send out some information and you're going to send out some information, and we'll go into some more detail about what that is. For those four-year schools, I just want to review the 3 different types of applications, because you're going to be asked when you're working in SCORE to designate how you're applying to each school. So as a reminder, early decision, that's the binding one, which means if you get in, you're going. You can only apply to one school under the early decision 1 application plan. Those deadlines are typically November 1st, November 15th kind of time frame. Really, if you're looking to apply ED to a school, you should probably already know that at this point. This is a big decision. It has to be a place that you can afford to go to if you get in. Many students, they want to do that because they feel like applying ED might be their best chance of getting in that school, or perhaps it's just a school that is far and away their favorite school. Those are some reasons that students might apply early decision. Early decision, though, students, sometimes you're listening to your friends and you feel like everyone is applying early decision, and I can tell you that's really not the case. It might feel like that, but in a typical year, we probably have about 50-ish students who are applying early decision 1. It kind of, varies a little bit, but we're generally in that kind of number frame. Now, early action, that one's not binding. You do need to check the details. There are a couple of schools out there who have something called restrictive early action. And for those schools, you still apply early, but they're restrictive with where else you can apply early. So some schools that have that are typically Stanford, Yale. I didn't check on what Princeton's is this year. Notre Dame has a funny little policy, and a couple of others. So if you see the word restrictive in there, you can always come ask me if you need help interpreting what their rules are and you want to make sure your plans are good. You can always check with me, but just read them carefully. But most schools, regular early action. I love it. You apply early, you find out early, which is great because it's fantastic to kind of hopefully have some admits in your pocket before we get to New Year's. Is a great feeling. But you still have until May 1st to decide. So that means you still have the ability to review those financial aid packages and leverage one school against another. Early decision, you don't have any of that kind of wiggle room, really. You can't leverage one school's financial aid package against another because you got in and you should be withdrawing all your other applications if you applied early decision. So early action is right for lots of kids, especially kids who had good junior years. They want to get some applications out early. Early action is for you. Those deadlines range typically between October and December kind of time frame. Then we've got regular enrolling. That's not binding. It's a lot like early action. They might notify on a rolling basis. When you see rolling, what that means is that they typically notify in like 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. Some schools have a regular decision, and typically for those, a lot of those schools, they'll notify all at once. So there'll be a certain day when they release their decisions. So Northeastern regular decision, they release their decisions all in one day. Other schools like Rutgers, they release on every couple of weeks. Some other schools just release decisions every single day as they make them. And for those, you also have until May 1st to decide. So again, you have that leveraging ability, those later visits, etc. So let's talk about those application components. The stuff you got from me early in the summer, I gave you some of these resources, but for those who missed it, what you want to start out by doing is getting yourself organized before you just start working on all kinds of applications, because you don't want to do more work than is necessary, because I can tell you this process is complicated enough. Don't make it worse than it needs to be. I do have a spreadsheet you can use as a template, and then you can customize it for yourself. It'll be linked in the materials that you get afterwards. Parents, this is a great place for you to help. I know that you're looking for places in the process where you can help. Helping your child to organize this kind of mass of information is helpful. And by helping, I mean helping. I don't mean doing for. But this is a really good skill for your student, because this will help them to be able to do this in other portions of their life and in college. So this is a good place to help. Reviewing the types of applications. Most students wind up doing the common application for a good portion of their application list. There are more than 800 colleges on the common application. One note for students who have long application lists is that there is a limit of 20 schools that you can apply to using the common application. So sometimes we do have a a small portion of our students who are applying to more than 20 schools, you want to make sure that you're doing that organizing that I just showed you ahead of time so that you're budgeting which of your 20 schools you're going to do using the Common App. So that you don't get to school 22 that you really want to apply to and then realize that you don't have an application form that you can use for it. So you want to organize that ahead of time. At this point, most of the schools that were coalition application exclusive have moved over to the Common App, which is fabulous as far as I'm concerned. Only the University of Washington is the only school that takes only the coalition application and has no alternative. I personally am not a huge coalition fan. I find it's more time intensive than the Common application for students, and students generally struggle a little bit with it. But for some students, it saves them work because they don't have to do a whole bunch of individual school applications. So if you guys do coalition, it's okay. But just know that that's kind of one of the issues with it. It takes a while. Then we've got state application systems, like the big one that our students use a lot of times is the University of California application system. They have their own system. If you're applying to a bunch of Pennsylvania state schools, not including Pitt and Penn State, there's a PASHE group application that you might have to do as well. Those are some of the most popular ones. And then of course, we've got school-specific applications. But again, we're looking to do as few total application forms as possible. We don't want to be filling in our name, address, parents' occupation, educational level, et cetera, more than we need to. Don't waste your time. Next thing, biggest part of the application is a transcript or SRAR. So if you log into your Genesis, you should be able to see your unofficial high school transcript. What you see in there is what is going to go to colleges. I think right now you should be able to see in the fourth box the schools, the courses that you're registered for this year. So that's what that transcript is going to look like when it goes out. I know some people have been antsy, how come we can't send the transcripts yet? We don't want to send that transcript out until after add drop is over so that we make sure that we're sending the correct, accurate transcript. We don't want to confuse things by sending multiple applications or multiple transcripts to colleges. So now they're having to figure out which is the most current one. We just want to send that one final one. So that's the reason that we do hold off until after add drop is over. So we're looking at probably transcripts will hopefully be ready to send out maybe the earliest, sometime around like the week of the 20th, maybe a little bit later in the week. The ones that we'll go for first are those schools that don't require counselor letters of recommendation and the counselor is just pushing out the transcript itself. So there's your time frame. I do see a couple of questions that came through about Rutgers. Rutgers, unfortunately, regrettably, did not move to the Common App yet. So for Rutgers, and many students will apply there, about half of our class applies there, it is coalition or the Rutgers application. If you are not having to do coalition for any other school on your list, don't waste your time. Do the Rutgers application. The Rutgers application will take you 45 minutes or less. The coalition application will probably take you about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So just saying, save your time and energy. Along those lines, some schools out there, a lot of schools actually, including Rutgers, which I just mentioned, no longer require a transcript. So while we'll be sending out your transcript to lots of schools that you're applying to, students, there are lots of others where you're going to have to do the work. So Rutgers, Penn State, the California system, all of those schools require something called a SRAR, which is kind of like an awkward word to say, but it's a self-reported academic record. So what'll happen is that you're going to need to type in all of the information off of that unofficial transcript into their system so that they can review it for admission. So that begs the question, like, what forces you to be honest? Well, your integrity, first of all, but beyond that, for the schools that you ultimately decide to attend, you are going to have to provide an official final transcript. And if things don't match up, goodbye admission. So you want to make sure that you're being honest and accurate when you're filling that out. In previous years, I've been able to do workshops with students where we work on SRAR together, what that's going to look like this year. Yes, I'm going to do something this year and I'll do it on an ongoing basis. I have to kind of work out what that's going to look like this year with lunches and haps and everything else, but I'll email out once we have those kinds of things set up for you. Just a sampling, just to kind of give you a look at what's out there. The major systems for self-reporting, one is actually called the SRAR, S-R-A-R. And that's that left column that's there. So if you see that there's a bunch of schools that you're applying to, like very common, students will have Rutgers, Penn State, and Pitt. That's just, and UDEL. That's super common. So the good news is if you're applying to those 4 schools, you actually only need to fill out the SRAR once with all of the information. You'll have to do a little bit for each of the additional schools, just in terms of kind of like clicking through, double checking it. Sometimes there might be 1 or 2 more fields you need to do, but you're only going to have to type in all the transcript stuff one time. So that's actually super helpful. However, there could be combinations of schools that you're applying to that might mean you need to do this many times in many systems. So if you're applying to Rutgers and University of Florida and Purdue and Temple, that's 4 different places that you're going to have to type in all of your courses and grades. There's no way to avoid it. This isn't a place that I can kind of like find some system to get you out of it. So that is something that you'll have to do. And it's good to know that ahead of time, so that you make sure that you budget for that work effort. And a lot of those schools will require that you do it by the deadline. I just got something from Rutgers today. I mentioned that because that's a big one for our students. Rutgers is not going to give a grace period for you to fill out the SRAR anymore. It has to be done by the deadline day. So just kind of know that's coming. You will get a million reminders from us, but you have to be paying attention and reading your email to know about them. Just to give you an idea of what SRAR, the different SRARs kind of look like. This is kind of one. This is from the actual SRAR, which is the same as the one that Rutgers uses. So basically for each one of these things, you pick a subject area, you type in the name of the course, you pick the level of the course, write your grade. It's a full year course and it's 5 credits. And then you hit enter and then you enter the next one. And so you're doing that for every single course that you've taken in grades 9, 10, and 11. And then for your 12th grade, you're putting them in here. And then instead of grade, you always wind up checking in progress. So this is just kind of an overview. It looks a little bit different in different systems, but this is the main gist of what you'll be doing. So moving on, kind of beyond transcripts, let me just see if there are any kind of frequent questions there. Okay. Standardized testing, we've talked about it a lot already. There are a few schools that are test blind. I think a few more have added on more recently, but the bulk of schools out there are test optional. The time that you decide how you're applying with scores or without scores is when you submit your application. So on the common application, typically you're going to see that question in the school specific section. So if you go to that My Colleges tab and you pick the schools on the left, and then you're in that little question section, usually it's somewhere within there. Most schools it's kind of the general section, but it might vary a little bit. That's where you'll pick, do I want my scores to be included in the review of my application? Yes or no. So that's where you're going to do that. So you might want to wait if you are taking the October SAT and that kind of, bears on whether or not you're going to apply with or without scores. You might want to wait until later in October to submit applications once you've gotten those scores back. Some schools will let you change your decision after you apply, but then there's other schools that will not let you change that decision after you apply. So you have to kind of know what the policies are and be careful about that when you're submitting. When are scores helpful? If they are strong or very strong, if your transcript is inconsistent and your scores are kind of somewhere in the middle, but more solid, those are good places to submit scores. If you know your scores are above average for those schools, that's a good place to submit scores. Your counselors and I are always happy to talk to students about kind of maybe where they should or shouldn't submit scores. It's not an all or nothing decision. So you could decide, I'm going to send my scores to UDEL and but I'm not going to send my scores to Rutgers. And that's okay. You can do that. So it's a school by school thing. For those of you applying to some of our Southern friends, any public school in the state of Florida, any public school in the state of Georgia, also University of Mississippi, the military academies were kind of cagey on it last time I checked, so make sure that you're checking on that policy for them as well. But the top 3 there, they all require scores, and that's not changing because that's a state board of governors decision, and that's not going to change. So you got to send scores to those schools. All right. Now, for those that don't know, this is kind of what we're talking about, what's remaining. For seniors, we've got October, we've got November, December. After that, that's the end of the road. for sure in terms of testing. You do want to check each college's website. If you're still testing this fall, you want to check each school's website according to the decision plan that you're doing to see when the last valid test date is. So some schools will, with a November 1st deadline, there are a couple schools out there that'll still take a November 6th test. There are other schools that will say no. Same thing for like November 15th. Will they still accept a November 6th test or not? So you have to check for each school. Kind of the time lane so that you know what to expect. When you see online, you'll see on the College Board website, they've got like a score release schedule, and it'll say like for the October 2nd test, scores are released. It's probably something around like October 16th to students, and then scores are released to colleges another 10 days after that. So make sure you're kind of building all of that in, especially if the school requires official test scores. So there's official test scores, and then there's self-reported or unofficial test scores. Official test scores are ones that are sent from the College Board or the ACT directly electronically to the colleges that you apply to. Lots of schools, if you're applying there, require that they're received officially. Rutgers, official scores, got to send them, got to pay to send them. There is an increasing movement, though, that more schools have added the ability to allow you to self-report your test scores. So for schools that allow that, typically the place they're getting that information from is on the Common App, because a lot of them are Common App schools, so somewhere within the application. Sometimes you might self-report them somewhere within the SRAR. So UDEL, I know, allows you to self-report them within the SRAR. The policy changes a little bit depending on the schools. Do you have to self-report them? Usually not. Could you send the official ones? For most schools, yes. It's fine with them. Why self-report them? Two reasons. One, you're keeping money out of the testing agency's pocket, which is fine with me. And two, then you can control that it's done on time, because sometimes it can be very stressful that piece is outside of your control. So if you went online tonight and you requested your scores to be sent from the College Board, they're going to go out in about 2 to 3 weeks, which is, yes, kind of ridiculous because it's electronic, but that's the way it works. And then once those scores are received by the college, they may or may not load them onto your account right away. So typically they only load them at certain intervals. So now, like, you're stressing out, wondering if the school has them, are they there yet? Did they make the deadline? But if you self-report them, then they're already there. So that's a nice thing. Just a couple of questions that I'm going to hit. We're not going to hit on all the questions that are in Q&A just because there's a lot. But schools don't know how many times you took the SAT. Depends on what you're doing, though. So remember that when you send scores, the default option that'll be selected on the College Board site is to send all of your scores. And if you, say, are signed up to take the October exam, and ahead of time you code 5 free schools to get your scores, and then those scores go out right away as soon as they're available, but they get your full transcript of scores. And that's fine, because most schools super score, which means they take your best individual scores and they use that for the admission decision. However, there are some students who feel really nervous about that policy, and they would prefer to kind of use score choice and pick and choose. If you wanted to do the pick and choose variety of, like, I only want to send my March scores and my June scores, you can't do that on test day. That's like I have to go back in and pay and pick and choose myself and send them. Just make sure you watch what you're doing when you order the scores. It's clear. You just need to look and pay attention to it. Just kind of viewing. Are colleges able to view the SAT scores even if you don't submit the scores in your application? Only if you send them. Otherwise, only if you pay to send them. Like they can't see into the College Board's database. You have to manually pay. How do I know if the school requires official scores or self-reported? That's all information you would get on the school's website. So my recommendation is that I like to go, when I've got my list of schools, I've got like my 8 schools. 8 is a good kind of nice number for students. That our average is probably somewhere around in that area in terms of how many students apply to. Take your 8 schools, open up 8 tabs, go onto their admissions website, and look for something. I like to look for undergrad admissions and then something like freshman application checklist, something along those lines, because then it's usually going to give you a nice bullet pointed list of the things that you need to submit and how you need to submit them. So you can check out, does it require an official transcript, or is there some sort of self-reported mechanism? You can check out, do they require official test scores, or can I self-report them? You can also check out how many letters of recommendation they'll accept. Will they accept outside letters? How many they require? And also anything else that they might require. So those are good things to pull together before you get into the application process. That's a great thing to start organizing. Like I said, I have a Google Sheets that you can use, or find something else that works for you. If paper is your friend, do it on paper, it doesn't matter. But those are good things to look at ahead of time. I'm going to keep on going a little bit here. Letters of recommendation, we've gone over this a lot. You've got the counselor letter. If you're applying to four-year schools and you do the brag sheet and that parent point of view survey, and you've entered your activities, you're applying to four-year schools that require the counselor, your counselor is going to write that letter for you. You don't need to make any kind of separate request in order to make that happen. For teacher letters, though, you did have to request those in SCORE. If you haven't done it, you need to go ahead and do that already. Note that there are some schools out there that will not accept letters of recommendation. Some popular ones, Rutgers, Penn State, WVU, do not take letters. Also, if you asked a teacher in person or by email and you didn't put it in SCORE, you're not getting a letter until you put it in SCORE. So you have to use SCORE. You can't kind of ignore it. The other thing I ask is that you do remain patient with your teachers as they're writing your letters. Remember that they're doing this generally on their time outside of the school day. They will get it done before your deadline, but remember, they've also probably said yes to other students, and their goal is to get everybody's stuff out on time. And so, I stay on top of them as well. So we're going to make sure that those things get out. Communicate with them, let them know kind of what your plans are. Also make sure your schools are on the applying list in SCORE according to what deadline you're doing, because those are the things we use to prioritize whose things need to get done right now and whose things might be able to wait until next week. So make sure you're following those directions. The essay, this is something students have already worked on. They did write an essay in junior year English. That is not done again as part of the curriculum. So that's it in terms of what's going to be done in school. I do review essays for students, so if they want to Google Doc share them with me, they can. They can start doing that. Students, you can start doing that when you're ready. I'll tell you, it might take me a little bit to kind of like get my act together here at the beginning of the year and be able to start reading them and start getting them back to you. But Google Doc sharing is the way to go, because then I can comment and feel like, hey, we need to meet and talk about this. We can do that. But a lot of times we can kind of, do it just through Google emails and commenting. Some other frequent things that people ask about, AP scores. Those get entered on the application. You don't need to pay to send AP scores. Activities and awards entered on the application. Should you do a resume? I only recommend it if there's going to be something on there that's more than what you've already put on your application itself. If you're just regurgitating it in a different format, it's not adding value, and there's no reason for you to be adding that information in. But if you've got an extensive list of things and things that can't really be described there, then that might be a reason for you to do a resume. Only some schools accept resumes. Usually if they do, it's some sort of upload in the school specific section of the Common App. Outside letters of recommendation, you're getting somebody who does not work at HHS to write a letter for you. Again, only some schools accept that. You should, for Common App schools, you're going to request that through the Common application, and your recommender will upload it directly to the Common App. There's a video on my YouTube that walks you right through that. If you're applying to a bunch of schools not using the Common App, we might have to work out getting that letter from your recommender, and then we can send it through SCORE. No common methods for portfolios and auditions. You've got to follow the school-specific guidelines. I'm not going to cover a whole lot of FAFSA tonight or financial aid, because we do have a separate financial aid night, and I know a lot. She knows like a million times more than me because it's her job. But things to know, FAFSA opens October 1st. That is used by most schools. CSS Profile opens October 1st. It's used by a smaller number of schools, most of which are more selective, most of which are private, and most of which are expensive. There are a few schools out there, Princeton comes to mind, that have school-specific forms. Parents, this is a great place to also get involved in the process, is starting to look at your kids' application list, going online and looking at what's required in terms of, one, how's your kid going to get considered for merit scholarships? Is it automatic, or do they got to do something else, and making sure that that's on their radar screen? And two, how do you apply for need-based aid and when at that particular school? So you will find that often deadlines for financial aid forms vary depending on the school and the decision plan. So if you're applying early action to Drexel, they want that FAFSA and that CSS profile. Typically it's like by November 15th or so. But if you're applying regular decision, it doesn't have to be there until something like, sometime in January. So it's different depending on how you're applying. If you're applying early decision, you are almost certainly going to have to file your financial aid forms perhaps by the same day as the application. So that might be coming up super duper soon. Does it mean you need to do it on October 1st? Pro tip, don't try to submit FAFSA on October 1st because I feel like it crashes every year. So, give it a minute after it comes up, and then you can work on it kind of that next week and get it in. But make sure parents, you can, this is a place for you to get involved. Make sure that you're knowing all those details, because you don't want to find out later that you're ineligible because you missed that you had to do all these other things. One thing I have mentioned here is IDOC, and I mention it because I get some questions about it a little bit later in the process. Some schools will require that you upload different kinds of documentation before you get your financial aid package. So they'll make you upload to IDOC, which is on the College Board site, but it'll be like W-2s, tax forms, other things like that. So some schools are going to ask for that information early in the process. It is typically schools that are CSS profile schools. Schools like Rutgers, that rarely happens unless you're applying to the EOP program. I've got some resources for you. Again, that's going to come out in some in the follow-up email. Okay, before we go any further, students, you gotta follow the step-by-step guidelines that we have through the process. So this is things that we should have already done, hopefully, many of us. Completed the release form in Genesis. That's that parental permission form. We've got I think we've got about 500 of them. So almost all of you have done it. So if you haven't, now is a good time to go in and knock that out. It'd take you like 3 seconds. Completing the FERPA waiver in SCORE. Students, if you haven't logged into SCORE recently, it's going to come up. So FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Basically what it talks about is whether or not you give permission, you want to waive or not waive your right to potentially see letters of recommendation at the school you go to if they keep them on file. So when you come into SCORE, it's going to ask you what you want to do. Generally, we suggest that you say that you grant, that you want to waive the rights to do that. And that gives colleges the confidence that everything is confidential and an honest review of you. You will also need to do this little FERPA waiver in the Common App as well if you're applying using the Common App. If you have not already done so, get your colleges on the applying list in SCORE. When you do that, it's going to ask students how you're applying, early decision, early action, or rolling. It'll give you customized choices depending on the school and what is applicable to that particular school. If you select, then it'll ask you which application you're using, common, coalition, or the school-specific one. Again, customized by the school. If you select common, it's going to ask you for the common application ID. That's super helpful to go ahead and put in. Completing the activities section in SCORE. We've talked about that before and where to access that information. The 2 teacher to counselor feedback forms, there's a link. If you didn't do that last year, most of you did. Brag sheet. Hopefully a lot of you did that over the summer. If not, that is something I'd recommend that you do as soon as possible. Your counselor will not move on writing that counselor letter of recommendation until that's done. And the same with that parent point of view survey as well. And then again, get those teacher letter of recommendation requests in. So this is stuff that we've known about since like June. So this is stuff that you've got to do. And if you haven't done it, these are things that you're a little bit behind on. And so these are things you need to prioritize doing first because they will prevent you from moving anywhere else in the process. And then basic overview of how it works. Students, you add your schools to the SCORE applying list. We just talked about this, right? You told me how you're applying, when you're applying, et cetera. That allows your teachers to see what deadlines you're applying by. So then the teachers can see the earliest deadline is November 1st. They know what they're gearing for. They're going to get that done for you in time. Your counselor can then see, okay, this is John's application plan. He's got 8 schools here. Looks like the earliest one is November 1st. He's on my radar screen for November 1st. Counselors, checks to see if you've done your brag sheet, et cetera, starts writing when they get a chance. Then student completes and submits the online application. You do that on your own, you submit it. You then may be applying early decision. You may qualify for a fee waiver. If that's the case, you're going to go ahead and do those forms in SCORE. If you tell SCORE, I'm applying to this school early decision, it is going to prompt you right through that early decision waiver. Students have to sign, parents need to sign, and then counselors will be the last ones to sign. It walks you right through it. You can't miss it. Once you've applied, you move the school to the applied list in SCORE. That's what tells, not me, but Ms. Jacobson as your counselor, that you applied and that it's time for her to send your application materials out. Then she takes the information. If she hasn't written your letter already, she writes it. She sends out her letter. She sends out the teacher letters that are complete. And if not, we wait and we cycle back and we'll send them if they're done a little bit later. And she also sends out the transcript if it's required. So that moving the school, putting the school on the applying list, important. Moving the school to applied, super duper important. If you miss that step, your stuff ain't leaving the building. So you got to get that stuff done. Students, you also are responsible for sending your SAT or ACT scores to the colleges. If the official scores are required, again, takes 2 to 3 weeks to get them out. So back up that in your timeline. And that's, generally what the application process looks like. It's not all that complicated. The biggest thing that will help you students is to make sure you are communicating early and often. And by early, I don't necessarily mean tomorrow because they're super slammed with scheduling. So don't show up all in their offices tomorrow, but start communicating with them well before your deadlines, early and often. Make sure they know what your plans are. Students and parents, read your emails. Students, you got to get in the habit of reading your emails every day, or you are going to miss information that's important, like, hey, did you know that there's a Rutgers SRAR, or something else that might be important to you. Moving the schools to the applied list, just talked about that. Other things to make sure are all as well. Entering that Common App ID number in SCORE, that's helpful. It's not a required field, but it's helpful because it will help colleges to match up their materials on their end. And we want to do everything we can to help those colleges get things matched up as soon as possible. On the Common App, when you're putting in those recommenders, it asks, who's writing the letters of recommendation for you. You put in Ms. Richardson's information. Don't put in her email address, because when you put in her email address, what happens is she gets an invitation from Common App. And then she gets confused as to why she thinks she's supposed to do it in SCORE, but Common App is emailing her. So keep them out. It also helps the colleges to know that they should be expecting things another way. So we don't use the Common Application system to send them. We use SCORE. So it lets them know that that's where they should expect them to come from. Send those official scores, do SRAR. One thing that's really, really helpful is on your SCORE webpage, in the right column, partway down the page, you're going to see a bunch of SCORE links, and there's a SCORE guide to the Common App. That is like the single best PDF ever, because it has screenshots for everything. So if you've got the early decision process, you're applying ED, you want to make sure you don't screw anything up, go right in there, and it literally has screenshots with arrows pointing at what you need to do on the Common App and what you need to do on SCORE. It does the same thing for letter of recommendation requests. It does it also for fee waivers. And it's super duper helpful because then you're sure that you're not messing it up. I'll have videos for some of those things as well, but that's a place you can always go to check. Another thing, make sure your name, your date of birth, make sure those things match up everywhere and that you're using all of the same information. Don't be applying to schools using a nickname. Make sure you're using the same name that you tested under and the same name that's on your official high school records. And then at the end, you want to make sure that you are checking in SCORE to see when that your materials have gone out. You'll be able to verify that. All you'll have to do is, under the applied list, you'll click on the school name, you scroll down, and it tells you what was sent and when it was sent. So you can see exactly what went out the door. And then you can check on the college's side to be sure that they have it. And that usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks, more around heavy deadline times, to make sure that things match up on the school's end. Most important thing, though, is to remember that, counselors are here to help students, and to help families get through this application process. We really want students to own the process, though. So that's who we really want to be hearing from. That's who I want to hear from. That's who the counselors want to hear from. Parents, encourage your child to ask questions. We want to help, but we are not going to able to come to your door with an application and say, hey, let's do this together. So if they need help, they need to ask. And we're here and we're happy to do that for them, but they do need to reach out. So encourage them to do that. Parents, I've got some tips for you. A lot of them are really around that, making sure that your child owns the process. Resist the urge to do it for them, even if it's super duper frustrating. I'm a parent, I get it. Sometimes you just want it to be done. But this is a place that's really not helpful for them. It is very apparent to everyone when, a 40-some-odd-year-old woman has written an application or an essay. It's very clear that it's me and not my 18-year-old. So resist that urge to do that for them. It's not helping them, but help them by reviewing their work. Because often they're, lacking the confidence that, perhaps it's not right. But if you review that, you can kind of check off and be like, yep, you've done exactly what you're supposed to do, and they'll feel so much better about it. So that's a great place to help them. I strongly recommend thinking about setting together a specific date and day of the week and maybe time that you're going to talk about applications. One of the things that, is very stressful for students is sometimes they feel like they're getting nagged at all the time. Every day they're kind of hearing about it a little bit more, and it actually tends to not make them make any progress. So one thing that can be really helpful is to set aside a day, maybe Sunday night after dinner. That's going to be, we're going to talk about it. We're going to go over things for like an hour, help you set your plan for the week, help them get some structure. And then they have to, kind of use their independence to move forward and get some of those steps done during the week. Parents, check your email. I'll always, I send out a lot of emails during the application process. On anything that's kind of like a every 3 or 4 week update, I always copy the parents on it. And so it's to both of you. And so a good idea, parents, if you see it, check in with your kid, like, hey, did you see that stuff? Call their attention to it and make sure that they know it's there. Remind them to check that application status. The other thing is, I will tell you, there are going to be bumps in the process. Sometimes, students and parents, you might check and be like, oh my God, the college says that they don't have my transcript. And, your first instinct is, you want to kill us, right? You feel like it's our fault that it's not there. Know that oftentimes it's part of the process. So, there are steps that we ask you to follow. First, we'll have you check, did we send it out? First of all, did you put it on the applied list? So we knew you applied. And then, did we send it out? If we sent it out, let us know that the college says that it's not here. If it's the next day, I'm going to tell you, like, dude, you got to give it some time. Remember how I told you it takes the schools a couple of weeks to match things up, but it's not instantaneous, even though it feels like it should be. They have a lot of matching they're doing, these schools. Some of them are getting 30, 40,000 applications. And they got to match up your stuff. So sometimes I'll tell you, like, dude, give it 2 weeks. But if you're still kind of like, hey, I'm still seeing it's not matching, let us know. We'll do the right, we'll work on that legwork of following up and figuring out what happened along the way. And we're here to work with you through that process. So make sure, students are reaching out to us and letting us know if there is something that does seem off, because we can help. So what we're going to do next is I will take a quick gander. I don't really want to go into too many more Q&As, and I think Ms. Smedley was answering a lot of them as we went through.
We definitely did get, I got some answers out. I would just say, I know our counselors are on here, and just want to remind everyone, there are some questions about, some common questions about using SCORE. So just remind you that during half period or during other periods that students are available, counselors are going to be going over how to use SCORE with them. Certainly you can make an individual appointment if you need help with that, but we're new to SCORE this year as well. The counselors have been working on getting trained on that throughout the past year. They actually we onboarded with them last fall with this class's information. So they're ready to do that, but it is our first time through. So that, and then Mrs. Thompson, there were a bunch of questions about the SRAR. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to like how I heard you say that that's in the typically in the freshman application checklist if there's a SAR necessary. But
Yeah.
other things that maybe people are worried, concerned, like, is that visible? When is it visible? How common is that? So maybe just some more general info on
Sure.
SAR.
I will give you the most annoying answer ever, which is it depends. So for some schools, you can start on your SRAR before you do the application. So for the schools that accept that, the SRAR, for instance, that one you can start doing ahead of time before you submit your applications. You want to make sure that when you create your SRAR account, you're using the same email. So this is that consistency thing I talked about with name. Consistency with email is super important as well. So you want to use your same email on, for instance, the Common application as you do on your SRAR account, and on your Rutgers application as you do on your SRAR account, because that enables schools to match that stuff up. And it should be a personal email, not your school email. But for many schools, you can start on it ahead of time. There are a few, however, that you can't do it until after. So like Temple, you can't do it until after. You don't get a link to it until after you submit your application for admission. So it does vary a little bit. So it is school specific. You'll find that information on the school website, and also your counselors and I know a lot about how a lot of them work. And we'll help you kind of through that process. So I wouldn't say I'll be honest, it's September 9th. I want you to know SRAR exists. I want you to have some sense of like, I'm going to have to retype all of my transcript into something. But you're not behind because you don't know anything more than that. Like, you're in a really good spot. In general, I'll find that students won't really get into doing their SRARs until like late October kind of time frame. So I kind of put some of those worries aside. I do have some students who, someone today emailed me their stuff, sent me their screenshots, and was like, hey, did I do this right? And it was perfect, which was great. But that student is, happily for him ahead. Most of our students are not ready. So I would put SRAR concerns to the back burner for a while. I'll let you know when it's time to worry. How's that? Let's see. SCORE accounts. Do parents need a separate SCORE account, Common App account? Parents know for Common App account, your child creates their own Common App account. You don't have to do anything there. Do they need a separate SCORE account? You have one. Your child can, if you're not already in there, your child can just hit invite from within their own account. That allows you to do some stuff in there, but really in terms of like who's moving things to apply and applying, that's your kid. This is all stuff that they need to do as part of the application process. And it is important that they own these things, because I will tell you, once you get to college, once your child gets to college, they're going to have to navigate things there. So this is the time to support them through stuff. But, it's their responsibility to make sure it is getting done. If you're getting a recommendation from outside of school, I'll answer that one too. Should you still ask two teachers? Yes, because an outside letter of recommendation does not count as a teacher letter. And most schools are very specific in that they want teacher letters of recommendation. The other ones are generally considered like a supplemental letter on top of that. So you want to make sure you got those teacher ones. And I think that's pretty close to hitting most of the stuff. And the other stuff, I think that you can take to the individual counselors, I would say. So what we are going to do is we are going to end this in just a second. Just as a little review here, this is the school counselor assignment. So just in case you're not quite sure who your child has as a school counselor, maybe you had an older kid and now the second kid has a different counselor, you don't remember their name. This is them. We have Sarah Jacobson, who is new in our office. She's replaced Kristen Saliba. And our counselors are, for the most part, paired off tonight. Ms. Smedley, I believe you sent that links out, correct?
Yes. So that should be in the email, same place that you saw the Zoom link, so you can return back to that. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop recording.